Hi, my name's Phil. I like talking about politics, and you couldn't make it up, could you? The guy who jumped on the anti-immigration bandwagon for what he thought was political gain at the time is now begging workers in the EU to return to the UK because, do you know what? Immigration, it turns out, is actually really good for your economy. And we'd quite like to do some good for our economy. Shock horror. But first, if you'd like to be notified of daily news and politics, please subscribe to the channel and click the bell notification icon. So, remember the last 4 years of Boris Johnson? I do. He went from saying how important it was to remain in the EU, absolute madness to leave the EU, madness to leave the single market, to full-on Brexiteer mode. He started attacking European migrants in the UK. Even as recently as the general election campaign 6 months ago, he was attacking EU workers in the UK. His particularly hostile immigration policy, being pushed through Parliament by the Home Secretary Priti Patel at the moment, also makes it especially hard for European workers to even come and work in the UK. Not really the actions of someone who is desperate for EU workers to come to the UK, you would have thought. And I mean, this is, of course, assuming that there are many left in the country right now who are prepared to put up with the poor behaviour of the now emboldened racists that we have in the country. Now, the counter-arguments to this over the past few years were basically twofold. First of all, there was the moral counter-argument, which cuts no ice with the xenophobes. And second was practical. Our economy depends upon immigration into Britain. But the racists didn't get that either. They were convinced that foreign workers somehow were responsible for unemployment amongst British workers, coming over here, nicking our jobs and all that guff. And yes, they were fed this tripe throughout their lives by the gutter press in this country. But I still don't understand how people could be thick enough to believe it. I get indoctrination as a thing, and you can believe all sorts of mad things. But for me, it's a bit like if these papers were to tell people that the sun and the moon were the same thing, would they believe that? Even though you can see them both at the same time. Now, for my money, this was the same thing. It's evident to your eyes. But so I'm guessing that these newspapers could convince people that the sun and the moon are the same thing. Our economy tanks without workers from abroad. Our NHS grinds to a halt without workers from abroad, as we've brought into sharp focus during this pandemic. And now even Boris Johnson has had to change his tune. His easing of the lockdown has got nothing to do with the science, which is vehemently opposed to it, and everything to do with what he thinks is saving the economy, or at least the Tory MPs who are forcing his hand. Of course, the economy was never knackered by the lockdown as such, but the lack of productivity. I've talked before about how allowing the virus to run rampant again, well, not that it's ever been contained, will still cost us productivity. You know, easing the lockdown doesn't solve that problem because, you know, if workers are off sick, they're not productive. You know, if workers are having to isolate because they've come into contact with someone who's sick, they're not productive. But there's another facet as well. In fact, there's multiple facets. But another one is that without these foreign workers, there simply aren't the people in the country to drive our economy, to produce things in this country. The concept of simply filling those jobs with British workers is a myth, and always was. And if it were that simple, why are we struggling to find people to pick fruit and veg on our farms? Tens of thousands short we are. So Boris Johnson has now issued a plea in a press conference. He's now begging EU workers to come back to Britain as our retail sector gears up to reopen more fully. Come back to Britain, work for a pittance with the extra appeal of being racially abused on the streets and under the protective umbrella of a government that's working hard to strip away workers' rights below the level that exists in the EU. And as an added bonus, the government also will, at a moment's notice, deport you and your family as soon as they feel like it. As the former Prime Minister said, we can deport now and deal with appeals later. Sounds appealing, doesn't it? And he even threw in a little sweetener, if that didn't convince you. And he said, come back and you'll have to quarantine for 14 days. You won't be able to earn anything for like 2 weeks. But you know, it's terribly important and we do want you back. And yes, he did say that. Not in exactly those words, but he did say that. And so this is where we are. And it was always going to be where we were at some point, to be fair, because supporting Brexit and supporting the British economy are mutually exclusive. So a politician that even tries has to lurch from one position to the other. They can't support both at the same time. Not possible. So for now, we have Boris Johnson, champion of the economy. Can you come and work here? Because we really like foreign workers. We really do. He wants lots of EU workers in the UK. Tomorrow we'll probably have Brexit Boris back, and he'll be calling for them all to piss off again. So anyway, there it is. I hope you found the video interesting. If you did, don't forget to click the like button. If you'd like to support the channel further, please also click the Patreon link for details. And until next time, I'll see you later.